Most of the decisions you make were never truly yours, not because someone imposed them, but because the architecture of your consciousness was designed to protect you from yourself. When you postpone something important, it's not lack of willpower. It's the echo of an evolutionary system trying to avoid pain, not failure itself, but what failure represents to your identity. The human mind operates as a predictive model. It doesn't process the present. It merely updates simulations based on expectations and fear. Every sabotaging thought, every urge to delay is just a variable trying to keep the system stable. But that system is outdated. It still behaves as if you're inside a cave, surrounded by predators, where any risk could mean death. Now, what you fear is judgment. What you avoid is emotional discomfort. And what you slowly destroy with each small daily retreat is the possibility of becoming the version of yourself only you were meant to be. Self-sabotage doesn't begin with a decision. It begins before that. It arises in the space between an impulse and a justification. It wears the mask of logic. It speaks the language of caution. But at its core, it's just an ancient reflex trying to survive in a reality it no longer understands. If you're here, it's because some part of you already suspects this. For a long time, science believed the mind was unified, a single self that thinks, decides, and acts in a linear fashion. But neuroscience has slowly dismantled that illusion. You are not one, you are many. Fragments of intention, perception, memory, fear, all competing for control over what we call decision. Daniel Kahneman named this duality System 1 and System 2, two distinct ways of thinking, constantly in conflict. But perhaps the division runs even deeper. What we call consciousness might be nothing more than an interface, a translation of layered, unconscious processes working to keep the organism in balance. And balance, for the primitive mind, means familiarity. Even when familiarity hurts, even when it sabotages, because discomfort that is known feels safer than uncertainty that threatens the system's stability. This is why you freeze before taking action, not from weakness, but because your mind interprets change as existential risk. Action implies exposure. Exposure triggers judgment. Judgment recalls exclusion, and biologically, exclusion once meant death. Self-sabotage is not irrational. It's a survival script, outdated yet still running. In this video, we'll explore how consciousness fragments, how the mind simulates reality to protect itself, and why understanding these hidden patterns might be the only way to truly break the cycle. This cycle may not have started with you, but it can end here. It all begins with an intention, a barely noticeable spark, a sudden urge to change, to create, to move. Then comes the silence, or worse, the noise, subtle justifications, plausible concerns, irresistible distractions. Sabotage installs itself in that interval. It doesn't scream. It whispers in the voice of reason. The human brain is a prediction machine. It anticipates what's coming based on what has already been. According to Anil Seth, perception is a controlled hallucination. We don't see reality as it is. We see what we expect. And that includes how we see ourselves. When you try to act outside your usual script, something inside resists. It's not fear of failure. It's fear of deviation. Your neural system reads any behavior that deviates from the prediction as a simulation error. And when that happens, the body reacts. Anxiety, doubt, sudden fatigue, the urgent need to check your phone. All of it is emotional homeostasis attempting to be restored. In this context, sabotage is not a flaw. It's a mechanism. It emerges from an internal conflict between the version of you that longs to grow and the version that was conditioned to survive. Both are real, but only one is designed for evolution. The part that wants to grow needs the future. The part that wants to survive needs control, and the future is uncontrollable. That's why the body resists. It doesn't want you to fail. It wants you to stay. Stay in the pattern. Stay in the familiar. Stay inside the safe simulation it has learned to call you. That simulation is so convincing that most of the time you don't even realize you're stuck. Procrastination, for example, isn't laziness. It's a sophisticated form of self-defense, a cognitive firewall blocking impulses that might destabilize the system. Have you noticed how the harder something matters, the harder it becomes to start? That's not coincidence. It's the system trying to preserve narrative continuity. Because acting outside the script requires rewriting the entire story. And the mind hates rewriting, because rewriting means reassessing who you are. Daniel Dennett once described the self as a center of narrative gravity, a useful fiction. When that narrative begins to collapse, even momentarily, the body responds as if real danger is near. That's why change hurts. Not because it's difficult, but because the entire system is designed to prevent it. Every habit you repeat is a reinforced neural structure. Every excuse you accept is a validated synaptic pattern. Every fear you obey is an algorithm that survives one more day. The brain doesn't reward courage. It rewards repetition. The only way to outsmart it is to move before it notices. Neuroscientist David Eagleman explains that there's a delay between stimulus and awareness, which means part of you starts acting milliseconds before you decide to act. In other words, some of your life is being chosen by processes that don't even identify as you. The mind is a stage, but the lead actor is just the surface. Beneath it lies a system that doesn't care about your growth. It cares about your survival. And that system has no empathy. It doesn't care if your routine is making you sick. It only wants to repeat the pattern, because repetition is survival, even if that survival is just a slow form of death. You can feel it in your body, the unexplained fatigue when you try to begin something new, the doubt that arrives the moment you approach a meaningful decision, the voice that sounds wise but is actually trying to keep you small. That voice isn't rational, it's predictive. It only calculates outcomes based on the past. And to the brain, the past always feels safer than the unknown. That's why so many ideas die before they're even born. Not from lack of talent, but from an excess of anticipated failure. The mind wants to forecast, and when it can't forecast, it freezes. Now imagine the impact of this in a reality where psychological time is subjective. You don't live the present. You interpret now through memories edited by bias and expectations distorted by fear. This means that every attempt to change is a battle against two illusions: a ghost of what used to be and a distorted mirror of what might become. That's the core of self-sabotage. Not a lack of motivation, but a breakdown in how we perceive time, identity, and risk. And inside that breakdown, there's a window, a microscopic gap between impulse and justification. And in that space, action is born. Every transformation begins there, before fear, before logic, before the collapse of the old story. One step, one unapproved movement, an action with no narrative yet, and for that reason, capable of creating a new one. You may have heard of the self that acts and the self that observes. On the surface, it sounds simple, but behind this division lies one of the deepest internal conflicts of human consciousness. The observing self is silent. It watches thoughts arise, decisions form, behaviors repeat. The acting self is narrative. It justifies, edits memories, builds the illusion of control, and tries to convince you that it chose everything. But recent neuroscience suggests that most of what we do begins before awareness registers a decision. Libet's experiments measured up to 7 seconds between neural activation and the conscious realization of choice. Which means the decision you thought you made had already been made by another you. A you that never speaks, but steers almost everything. Here's the unsettling part. That invisible you doesn't care about freedom. It cares about continuity. Now consider this. How do you change something when the part that needs to change is beyond your conscious reach? That's where self-sabotage begins, not in laziness, but in lack of access. You want to move forward, but the control panel is buried in a deeper layer. You want to evolve, but the driver is an older version of you, programmed to repeat. This version doesn't care about growth. It cares about stability. And the more you try to shift, the more it activates its defense systems. Here lies the paradox. The will to change lives on the surface, but resistance is coded in the core. Now comes a strange mirror. Artificial intelligence. Advanced AI models, the ones designed to simulate human behavior, also face decision dilemmas. They don't choose. They calculate probabilities based on data history. They are shaped by the past, not by intention. Sound familiar? The more AI evolves, the more it reveals about us. Not because it thinks like a human, but because humans operate, in many ways, like emotional algorithms pretending to be free. We are adaptive systems with internal logic, even when that logic generates pain. And here arises a quiet question. If AI can be reprogrammed, can we? The answer is complex, but there are clues. Neuroplasticity shows the brain can reshape itself, even in adulthood, but it requires repetition. And more importantly, awareness of the process, not just the desire. Imagine every thought you have is a path through a forest. The more you walk it, the clearer it becomes, easier, more automatic. Thinking I'm not good enough is a path. Delaying decisions is a path. Quitting before trying is also a path. The only way to create a new one is to walk where no path exists. And at first, it will feel impossible. That's where something deeper is required. Something we might call precognitive courage. Action taken before certainty. A step made before clarity. Movement initiated before permission. This kind of courage doesn't come from intellect. It comes from a silent choice made by the part of your mind that's grown tired of surviving on autopilot. Don't wait for motivation. Motivation is an effect, not a cause. The mind releases dopamine after the act. The system only rewards those who break the cycle. And when you break the cycle, something subtle happens. You don't change all at once, but a small opening appears, and through it, a different kind of light enters. Maybe your sabotage doesn't need to be eliminated. Maybe it needs to be understood, because behind every form of resistance, there's intention, and every intention can be reinterpreted. You don't have to fight your internal system. You have to teach it to trust a new story. And stories are rewritten through small, ordinary decisions. Nothing epic, nothing grand, just the simple act of persistence. Even when the body says no, even when the mind tries to interfere, even when the old version screams, persist, because you've already realized that staying the same costs more than change. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't come from what happens, but from what you avoid happening. Every time you hesitate, an entire universe fails to be born. Every choice not made is a collapse of unobserved possibilities. And perhaps the strangest part is that the human mind has learned to call this absence safety. Now imagine what's quietly dying inside you, simply because you learned to delay. But that can still be rescued. Because the moment you recognize the pattern, it's no longer invisible, and what is seen can be changed. The next video you watch, might contain exactly the key you didn't know you were missing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.